Okay, folks, it's now time for every high school student's favorite activity in an English class, analyzing the poetry of Shakespeare. Really? Wow, that's an intense expression of happiness, Paul. Please don't act on it. I like you. I think we all do. We want to keep you around. Yeah, a little bit, but that's all right. It's usually dark in here. That was a pun. We're doing Shakespeare. What? Okay. So, verse analysis in Shakespeare. Now, I'm not simply running through everything that you ran through last year and talking about sonnets and talking about quatrains and couplets and talking about iambic pentameter. Well, I should rephrase that. I will talk about those things. However, the application of those concepts will be quite different. The way in which you'll deal with those concepts at the play level will be a bit more advanced than freshman level Romeo and Juliet study. So if you remember some of the concepts from last year, fantastic. You'll hear some of them again and you'll probably rush through them really quickly. But very quickly we'll start talking about the application of those concepts to every single page and every single line in such a way that you'll understand why Shakespeare uses the particular poetry style that he uses from one page to the next, from one character to the next. So we're talking not just about spitting something back on a multiple choice test or matching, but actual application. And of course, you'll start that on Monday when your group activity asks you to analyze a verse. So let's get into it. Some basic concepts and everything else. First of all, definitional material. Meter, the arrangement of accented and unaccented syllables in a line of verse. Meter is a measure of accents. A measure of your emphasis. Are you accenting a syllable or not accenting a syllable? Ryan, what is the meter of your name? I think you got the right idea. Accented to unaccented. You have two syllables. Accented to unaccented. Ryan. Ryan's name is trochaic. Trochaic is an adjective describing the meter of his name. Accented to unaccented. It's Ryan, not Ryan. You hear the difference? Let's see, who else can I pick on for a moment? I want to think. I have no Daniels in this room, do I? Daniel's a good one. What's Daniel? Accented to unaccented, right? Daniel. What's the feminine form? Danielle. Do you hear that the only difference between those two words, besides the spelling, of course, the only difference in speaking is the difference in accenting syllables? Daniel versus Danielle. So we go to the feminine simply by changing the way we accent syllables. You know about accenting syllables because you're a natural user of the English language. You understand it, and you can hear it if you're attuned to it. Words have natural accents, and poets know this. So poets use particular words in particular places in the line because of how they're accented. So if Shakespeare were using Ryan's name in a line, he would know that it's trochaic, he would know that it's up, down, or accented, unaccented, and he would fit it in his line accordingly, placing it within an overall unit, and you know what that unit's called. To be or not to be, that is the question. One of the most famous lines in Shakespeare's canon. A lot of single-syllable words. So how might you determine accents in a line that contains a lot of single-syllable words? Jordan. Okay, small phrases that go together. What do you mean by that? How does that help you with the accented, unaccented? There's usually a rhythm. But now, Jordan, we're doing this kind of artificially. You know very well that Shakespeare's meter is iambic pentameter. You've learned that before. So if you remember your iambic pentameter from last year, you probably know where the accents lie. And this is a really easy line. But let's say you had no idea the meter that Shakespeare writes in, and you had to do what's called scanning this. Anybody remember the term scan, what that means? You may not have read it or heard it before. Scan is a verb, and it means to determine the meter of a line. Okay? So if you're scanning this line, you're determining its meter. You've got to find accented versus unaccented. How do you do that? You're right. There should be a natural rhythm. But what is the natural rhythm? Is it down, up, or up, down? Or is it down, down, up, or down, up, down? There are 5 different metrical arrangements in poetry. And then there are variations. So how do you determine? Anybody have an idea? Anybody want to tell me which one of those words or syllables they think is accented and why? Why? Why is it B, not B, as opposed to 2 or 2?
Because 2 is the less.
There you go. That's important, that's important, that's important. If I say to be or not to be, I have a subtle emphasis on the important words, and the important words are be, not, and be, not 2 or 2. I don't say to be or not to be. I say to be or not to be. Now I'm exaggerating it. No Shakespearean actor would perform it in that way, but there's a subtle emphasis on those words. That's a good way to do it. So Ryan's correct. If I want to determine the meter of a line, I look at what words I believe to be important. And good poets will place these words of importance in the positions of accent. That's why it's written that way. He didn't write it that way because he thought, oh, that sounds good. He wrote it that way because he knew his meter. And he knew where the accents should lie and the natural rhythm of it. So he places important words like be, not be in the places of accent. This is one of the reasons why we consider Shakespeare and other people like him to be geniuses, because they use music, or they use words in a musical way that they understand rhythm and importance and language and everything all in one big package. Another way you could do this, finding polysyllabic words, that means more than one syllable, and determining how you would say that naturally. There's only one in here. It's question. So is question up, down, or down, up? Question. I say it like that. Question. I don't say question. I say question. These are my marks. Unaccented, accented, unaccented, accented, unaccented, accented, unaccented, accented, unaccented, accented, and so on. I've just scanned that line. It's a very easy line to scan. It's a good place to start. Concept 2, the foot. The foot is the unit. Meter is measured in feet. And yes, the plural of foot is feet, not foots. I was actually just prepping for today and reading a kind of classic text on English verse and read a little footnote that I didn't notice before, although it makes sense. The word foot comes from the fact that the rhythm was usually tapped out on a foot. So every time there was a unit done, there was a tap on the foot. Foot, foot. That's why it's called a foot. A single unit of syllables. It is 2 or 3 syllables. This line is arranged in feet of 2 syllables. And how do you know that? You can see the pattern, the 2-syllable pattern. Now you're going to say, well, whoa, hold on a second. There's half step at the end. I know. I will address that. Don't worry. But this is pretty regular 5-foot length. 2 syllables. So, meter, overall arrangement. Feet, the units of measure. And then this is what Shakespeare uses. Like I said, there are 5 iambs in poetry, or 5 feet in poetry. You only need to learn 1. Next year, by the way, you go to American Lit. If you study poetry seriously, I know Moffitt does it, some other teachers might do it, you'll learn the other 4. But, and they are iambs, trochees, anapaests, amphibrachs, and dactyls. But you only need to worry about the iamb. The iamb is the down-up. Da-dum. Beat on the second. Trochee is its opposite, and that was Ryan's name. Beat on the first. Up, down. Down, up, down. Shakespeare usually uses this He usually uses iambs as his feet. And how many of them does he usually use per line? Not 10. 5. Hence, what do we call his verse? Iambic pentameter. That means we have iambs and 5 feet per measure. 5 feet for the meter. That's what iambic pentameter is. On an off note, anybody have an idea why he would use iambs instead of trochees? Why go down up instead of up down? What's the advantage of that? I'm speaking to be or not to be. That is the question. Why would I do that as opposed to arranging it such that it keeps falling down from up to down?
Maybe so you can end on a more dramatic point.
Now Paul's thinking in terms of theater, and he's writing for theater. Now some analysts will say, well, it's more natural to rise in your voice. People usually speak that way. Okay, there's one explanation. Another explanation, the one that I like a lot, is that iambic pentameter encourages you to push out your voice. And we're dealing in theater where there are no microphones, no amplification devices, and actors must project. What's it easier to project with? Lines of verse that naturally push up your voice at the end, or those which push it down? Well, a good actor could probably deal with whatever, but it's going to be easier to deal with iambic pentameter. So he uses it. And even though you might be a little bit scared, we're dealing with some heavy concepts in verse, realize that Shakespeare will make it easy for you. There are other poets who will just, if you decide to study poetry seriously, will drive you nuts. They're so creative and so unpredictable, and yet so genius. Shakespeare is completely predictable. Is he creative sometimes? Does he mix it up? Yeah, but for the most part, he's predictable. His sonnets are lockstep predictable. The lines of verse within his plays are fairly predictable. Twelfth Night. So let's start with a line from Twelfth Night. In sooth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me. You say it wearies you. But how I caught it, found it, or came by it, what stuff 'tis made of, whereof it is born, I am to learn. And such a want-wit sadness makes of me that I have much ado to know myself. Yes? Is that? Oh my gosh, that's right. I apologize. Thank you. It's Merchant of Venice. Sorry. I was scanning through my my presentation, and I noticed that I did not have any titles on there, and I just glanced at it. I'm like, oh, somebody's really sad. And Twelfth Night, people, why did I say Twelfth Night? Yeah, but what's the first speech of the play? Orsino being lovesick and saying, oh my gosh, I'm so sad, this is miserable. But you're correct. Apologize for that. Here's, we got Merchant of Venice. In sooth, I know not why I am so sad. It wearies me. You say it wearies you. I'm emphasizing it a little bit. It's natural iambic pentameter, and those first two lines are fairly perfect. Okay? Goes up, down, up, down, up, down. We have a couple terms to refer to a line which ends imperfectly. I'm going to refer to a feminine ending. There are masculine endings and feminine endings. Masculine endings are endings which are fulfilled, complete, and, as the classic poets might say, perfect. Feminine endings are those which are somehow incomplete, usually by adding an extra syllable, which might actually break the rhyme a little bit if it's rhymed verse, or it breaks the meter slightly. And yes, please be aware of the inherent sexism in the term when I say that a feminine ending is an imperfect line. Poetry analysis was developed by white guys on college campuses, not by women. So there you go. The feminine ending is when the line is imperfect. The to be or not to be, that is an imperfect line because it has an extra syllable. But here's what I want to assure you of. The second I teach iambic pentameter and I talk about Shakespeare's regularity, and you start scanning verse and you say, wait a minute, hold on, that looks like a trochee right there, and there's an extra syllable, or that's only 9 syllables long, what's going on? Shakespeare's verse is fairly regular. However, if you lock in every single line, it's not always perfect. And a lot of these imperfections are accepted by the general poetry community as being conventions that make sense. You also must realize that when you're speaking a line, in 2011, you would speak a line quite differently from an Elizabethan. An Elizabethan might slur together two syllables into one. Now, often, in a good edition, like the Oxford School of Shakespeare, they'll make notes to that effect. Have you seen a note yet where you have a word and in the side note it's the same word but there's an accent? You've seen that? Okay, anybody have a clue why that note is there? Not a different meaning. The word means what? How you would say it. So if I say cursed, how many syllables is that? One. But if I put an accent on the E, it's now cursed, and that's two syllables. So if in the original there was no accent, sometimes the Oxford School of Shakespeare will say, hey, hold on a second, that would be pronounced with two syllables in order to preserve the meter and Shakespeare's original intention. But you're not Elizabethan, you wouldn't know that. So if you see a side note that gives you an accent, realize that they are correcting something because of the poetry meter. Often those accents are contained in the actual text as well. So if you see any examples, that's what those are about. Keep deleting this. You will often see me if I'm reading Shakespeare, if I'm reading it for verse, you'll often see me counting out on my fingers. Poets in composing sometimes tap on their fingers and use other sorts of finger and foot motions to keep time and rhythm and understand syllables. Often if I'm doing this while I'm reading Shakespeare, I'm counting syllables. And happy day when I see students on a test, and I saw this the first time I taught Shakespeare in this way. Suddenly they're taking tests and they're doing this because they're trying to determine the perfection of the line. Line 3, but how I caught it, found it, or came by it. 11-syllable line. It's a feminine ending, it's imperfect, it's accepted. There is only one significant break in this line, and that is here. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But for the most part, the rest of it is regular. Okay, blank verse. Unrhymed verse with a fixed meter. So there's no rhyme, but the meter is fixed. And by fixed meter, I mean it's regular. If it's iambic pentameter, it's aside from feminine endings and some little deviations like that, it's regular iambic pentameter throughout. So blank verse is still verse. Now I want to pause for a moment because you're about to need to understand what this word means, verse. Verse means poetry, and that means that the words and syllables and lines are arranged based upon sound. And lines end when sound or metric units are completed, and when the poet decides that the sort of measure, the musicality has finished, and then they break to a new line. When you're writing an essay, why do you break to a new line? You have a new idea, so a new paragraph would break you to a new line. So it's totally determined by content, not by the structure of your words, right? Yeah, that's because you're not writing poetry. Or some of you might say, well, I break to a new line because I just keep typing and the computer throws me over to a new line. In other words, the margin has come up, and that's why you go to a new line. That's because you're not writing poetry. The poet will break to a new line based upon meter and based upon what the poet wants to do with that particular meter. Shakespeare will break to a new line with verse when he has completed his pentameter unit, unless he wants to break it in some way. So obviously this is, once again, blank verse because it contains no rhyme, no regular rhyme scheme. If you see a rhyme conspicuous within a line of verse, it could be explained by a couple different reasons. It could be an accident if it's in the middle of it. It could be just coincidence, although Shakespeare is usually too good for coincidence. If it happens at the end of the line, there's a reason for it that I'll talk about. But this is blank verse, no coherent rhyme scheme. And then, of course, you have rhymed verse. And rhymed verse is very simple in Shakespeare because it has rhyme. Often his rhymed verse, often, not always, often his rhymed verse is shorter because it's usually song. People in The Tempest, you've seen it when Ariel sings. The lines are shorter and they start to rhyme. Who else is singing song? Yeah, Twelfth Night. Was Festi singing? Yeah, Festi singing in Twelfth Night, so you'll see some song there. So when you start to see song, he often breaks into smaller units. Midsummer Night's Dream people, you'll see it when Puck starts singing. Yeah. Oh, that's right. The little notes that are in the caskets in Merchant of Venice. Very good. So those are considered to be written poetry within his play. And he breaks lines to shorter, and then he usually rhymes. It creates a certain type of artificiality. Let's take a look. This is Midsummer Night's Dream. 2-1. That means that you folks have read this. Who's speaking? Who would be explaining what's going on with Titania and Oberon? I'm sorry? Puck. Cassie, tell the audience who Puck is. And he's a fairy, right. So he's a fairy messenger, trickster kind of character. Puck's a fantastic character. He's a joker, he's very likable, and he's speaking in rhyme. The king doth keep his revels here tonight. Take heed, the queen come not within his sight. For Oberon is passing fell in wrath, because that she, as her attendant hath, a lovely boy stolen from an Indian king. She never had so sweet a changeling. Why is he rhyming? Now here's the big question, right? We don't have a note in a casket. We don't have a song sung by somebody. We have somebody delivering actual lines spoken in dialogue. Why is he rhyming? True. However, Portia tells stories in background as well. Everybody tells stories in background. Prospero tells stories in background as well. They don't rhyme when they do it. It's to give a different kind of feeling, but it's not to add extra drama or emphasis. Because he's a fairy and therefore he is magical and therefore he is not quite, no, actually that would be relatively unpredictable. Because he's a jokester, he's a trickster, he's not very serious, he's a lighthearted sort of character. If you start speaking in rhyme, and you speak in rhyme all the time, and you're really good at it, and then I can't do it. Sorry, I tried. But if I start speaking in rhyme as I'm lecturing, Zoe's over there laughing. Look at the reaction. The reaction is immediate. Rhyme makes us comfortable, makes us laugh, makes us think that something is silly. Dr. Seuss is not a treatise on growing up that is dark and serious and somber. It is fun, it is lighthearted. Why? Because it plays with rhyme so much. And rhyme makes us feel lighthearted and makes us feel like something is relatively silly, or somebody is relatively silly. Why shift into rhyme verse? Because we're not serious. That first line from Merchant of Venice, Antonio is deadly serious. He's talking about his depression, and he's serious about his depression, so he speaks in blank verse, as suits. Sometimes you have rhymes that are couplets. You've seen couplets in sonnets before. But in Shakespeare, couplets often end a speech of blank verse or they end a scene. Now, if I say they end a scene or they end a speech of blank verse, see how quickly it takes you to find one. I'm serious, find one in your play. I could pick up any one of your plays. I could pick up a new play of Shakespeare that I've never read before and find a couplet within about 15 seconds. What you got? Right. Then and men. At the end of which act scene? Act 2, Scene 1. Yes, and I'm sure hands will go up and everybody will find them. Couplets are kind of like a period at the end of a sentence. And they end scenes, or they end somebody's time on stage. Sometimes in the middle of a scene, when somebody walks off stage, ends with a couplet. That's Shakespeare's convention. That's theatrical convention to say, hey, I'm done. Bye. I'm out. That Twelfth Night people, that quotation that you might have seen where Viola admits her love for Orsino and wants to be his wife, that's a couplet. Oh, barful strife that I would be his wife, something like that. Here's Merchant of Venice, I was correct this time. Go presently inquire, and so will I, where money is, and I no question make to have it of my trust or for my sake. Was that the one you were looking at? This is still very serious. This is Antonio speaking to Bassanio, and they're not joking around. Puck was joking around. The rhyme is consistent. The rhyme is carried. The rhyme is part of discussion in the middle of a scene. He is not serious. They are serious. However, there's an ending. So rhyme is used for different purposes throughout Shakespeare. Now, this is important. Prose is regular speech with no intentional rhyme or meter. None. You write in prose. I am speaking in prose. And so do Shakespeare's characters at times. Your essays are written in prose, which means they obey sentence structure and they obey paragraph structure, but they do not obey metric poetic structure. They are not composed in verse. They are composed in sentences and paragraphs. Melissa? Absolutely. You know how you can see it on the page? Take a look at any of your plays, pick any one. See, I'm on Measure for Measure, page 53. Do you see how the margin is justified on both sides? It's flat on both sides. That's prose. If you see lines that are not justified totally, they're only left justified, they're ragged, they end at different spots, that's verse. Why? Prose is one free-flowing idea with no stops except when they're done, which means that it stops on that side of the page. Why? There's no more page left. The margin's done. So prose has no structure. And you might look at it and say, well, it's very structured. No, it's not. It just keeps flowing and flowing. And if there were no page, it would be one line. But we have pages, so we have paragraphs. The poetry in there, the verse in there, looks ragged, but it's actually very structured because it ends based upon the completion of what? Not an idea. When would the line end? No, I mean the individual line, not the overall, I'm sorry, Chris, not the overall line from a character, but why would an individual physical line in poetry end? Because the meter's done. If it's pentameter, he's fulfilled the pentameter unit, and he's ready for a new pentameter unit. So it goes on to the next one. Now, this is one of the failings of smartboard software that drives me nuts. It won't justify. So I apologize for this. But yes, and once again, making mistakes. Here we have, or no, I didn't make a mistake, right? We've got Lancelot here. Measure from it, or this is Merchant of Venice again. Gosh. Yes, in different ones. Okay, so what this should do, but Smart Notebook won't justify. It'll only left justify, right justify, or center. I apologize for that. It should look clean over here too. But notice his lines just keep going on and on. All of you should be able to find prose in your play. And all of you should be able to see it contrasted with verse. You should be able to see one character speaking in verse and one character speaking in prose. This might be a good place to pause. And I realize that we probably need another 5-10 minutes or so in this lecture to complete it. So we'll complete it on Monday, and I'll see if we need to abridge the group activity because I don't want to rush you unduly. But that's a good enough place for us to stop. Continue to look at Act 3 to read that for Tuesday. And now as you read, start paying attention to the verse structure. Pay attention to when people are speaking in prose, when they're speaking in blank verse, and so on.